Welcome, everyone. Today, I want to share some important insights around attention, focus, and ADHD, a topic that is increasingly relevant in our modern environment, where distractions are abundant and attention is under siege. Let's begin with a core principle. Focus is not just a mental state. It's a neurobiological skill. It's governed by very specific circuits in the brain, and whether you've been diagnosed with ADHD or simply feel your attention is scattered more than you'd like, there are practical, science-backed tools that can help. But first, let's talk about 5 major signs of ADHD, and I want you to listen closely, because many of these signs show up in people who don't have ADHD but are living in high-stimulation environments. ADHD is often misunderstood as simply a lack of attention or an inability to sit still. But from a neuroscience standpoint, it's far more nuanced. ADHD is not about having too little attention. It's about an inability to regulate attention appropriately. In other words, it's not that the brain can't focus, it's that it struggles to control when and how that focus is deployed. This is a key distinction. The challenge isn't about attention deficit, it's about attention dysregulation. At the core of this dysregulation is the brain's dopamine system. Dopamine is a neuromodulator. It doesn't just turn neurons on or off like some neurotransmitters. Instead, it changes the way networks in the brain function. Think of dopamine as a kind of volume control for brain activity. It determines how motivated you feel, how alert you are, and whether you can persist through a task that doesn't provide immediate gratification. In individuals with ADHD, research shows that dopamine transmission, especially in the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, is often impaired. These areas are critically involved in executive function, working memory, and behavioral control. As a result, people with ADHD are highly sensitive to novelty, stimulation, and external cues. This sensitivity explains why someone with ADHD might struggle to concentrate during a boring lecture, but can hyperfocus on a video game for hours without distraction. Both states are extreme ends of the same spectrum. From a structural standpoint, studies using fMRI have shown that the prefrontal cortex, which governs focus and impulse control, tends to mature more slowly in people with ADHD. There's also reduced connectivity between this region and other areas of the brain responsible for filtering distractions and planning behavior. Essentially, the network responsible for guiding attention like a spotlight is faulty. It flickers or turns toward the wrong things at the wrong time. So how does this play out behaviorally? Individuals with ADHD may start tasks with good intentions but quickly abandon them when novelty wears off. They may impulsively jump from one activity to another, not because they lack discipline, but because their brains are constantly seeking stimulation that's interesting enough to keep the dopamine levels from dropping. They're not lazy. Their neurochemistry is actively working against sustained effort, unless it's tied to high stimulation or immediate reward. This also has social and emotional consequences. Imagine how it feels to be capable of intense focus in one moment and totally scattered the next. It leads to frustration, self-doubt, and sometimes shame. Many people with ADHD grow up being told they're not trying hard enough when in reality, their efforts are being undermined by biological systems outside of conscious control. But this doesn't mean attention can't be improved. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt, remains active throughout life. What this tells us is that even if someone has a predisposition for attention dysregulation, there are specific strategies that can help shape the neural circuitry in a more stable direction. The first step is understanding the role of the environment. Modern life bombards us with dopamine triggers, notifications, scrolling, fast-paced content. For someone with ADHD, these micro-rewards overload the system and make slower, more deliberate tasks feel even more intolerable. One practical approach is to reduce baseline stimulation levels. That means limiting background noise, minimizing multitasking, and creating specific windows of deep work that are free of novelty-driven distractions. It's also critical to reframe how we think about attention. Rather than trying to force focus all day long, a better strategy is to set intentional, short periods, maybe 90 minutes, where the brain is conditioned to enter a task-focused state. Anchoring your vision, for example by fixing your gaze on a single location or object while working, can actually increase the signal-to-noise ratio in the visual system and help engage the prefrontal cortex. Where your eyes go, your brain follows. Even more powerful is the strategic use of reward. Instead of waiting for dopamine to arrive naturally, we can create it through deliberate behavior. Completing a focused block of work and then taking a short, enjoyable break creates a reward loop that reinforces the neural pathways associated with focus. This is how long-term attentional control is built, not through willpower, but through systems that work with our biology, not against it. Ultimately, understanding that ADHD is about attention, misregulation, not deficiency, allows us to approach the issue with empathy, science, and effectiveness. It also empowers anyone, regardless of diagnosis, to cultivate better focus through structure, tools, and targeted habits that reshape the brain's relationship with attention over time. One of the most persistent and frustrating features for people with ADHD, or anyone experiencing focus challenges, is the inability to complete tasks. This isn't simply procrastination or laziness. Rather, it's a neurobiological breakdown in the brain's capacity to initiate, sustain, and complete goal-directed behavior. From a neuroscience perspective, this involves specific dysfunctions in the brain's executive control networks, particularly the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and basal ganglia. Let's start with what executive function really means. Executive function is the set of mental processes that allows us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. These processes are orchestrated largely by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region right behind the forehead, known for its role in thinking, planning, and controlling impulses. In people with ADHD, this region tends to be underactive or poorly connected to other brain areas that help with motivation and reward anticipation. This makes it incredibly difficult to persist in a task once it stops being stimulating or immediately rewarding. That's why you often see a person with ADHD start something enthusiastically but leave it unfinished once the novelty fades or when the steps become repetitive or difficult. To understand the neuroscience more deeply, consider the role of the anterior cingulate cortex ACC, a part of the brain that evaluates whether a task is worth continuing based on effort, reward, and expected outcome. In healthy attention systems, the ACC works like a cost-benefit calculator, pushing us to complete tasks even when they're not fun, because it projects the long-term reward. In ADHD, the ACC is less responsive to non-immediate rewards. It's as if the internal calculator only recognizes what's rewarding right now and undervalues what lies ahead. This leads to frequent tasks, switching, distraction, and ultimately abandonment of important goals. There's another important player, the basal ganglia, a set of structures deep in the brain involved in habit formation, motivation, and motor control. In ADHD, the communication between the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia is often disrupted. This miscommunication contributes to poor task initiation and difficulty maintaining the mental energy to carry through a task from start to finish. Now, it's critical to highlight dopamine's role here again. Dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It drives the anticipation of reward and helps sustain attention across time. People with ADHD tend to have lower tonic baseline dopamine levels and oversensitive phasic burst dopamine spikes in response to novelty. This means they may get a big dopamine hit from starting a task, but once the task plateaus or slows, that drive drops off sharply. It's not a failure of desire or intelligence, it's a system that runs out of fuel too quickly. This brings us to the behavioral manifestations. For example, a person may start cleaning their room, then 10 minutes later start organizing a drawer, then begin replying to a text, and eventually forget why they even got up in the first place. These aren't isolated events, they're linked to how the brain prioritizes and sequences information. The working memory buffer becomes overloaded, and the system doesn't know what to complete first. In neuroscience, we call this poor tasks, switching, control, and deficient top-down regulation. What can be done? Fortunately, there are science-supported ways to strengthen these systems whether you have ADHD or are simply overwhelmed by modern multitasking. First, breaking tasks into clear, small steps provides more frequent opportunities for reward, which is crucial for low dopamine systems. Each completed micro-task delivers a mini dopamine spike, reinforcing motivation. This is why checklists can be powerful tools for those with ADHD. Each check mark isn't just progress, it's biochemical reinforcement. Second, externalizing tasks, writing them out, using physical cues, or involving others helps offload the demand on the prefrontal cortex. Instead of holding everything in working memory, the brain now has external support to maintain focus and stay on track. Third, there's a tool called implementation intention. It's a behavioral technique where you plan specific actions in advance. If situation X arises, I will do Y. This primes your neural circuits to respond more automatically, reducing the cognitive load of decision-making in real time. Research has shown this is particularly effective in populations with impaired executive control. Finally, eliminating friction matters. The fewer steps between intention and action, the more likely a task will be completed. This might mean setting up your workspace the night before, putting your phone in another room, or using apps that lock you out of distractions. These strategies aren't crutches, they're tools to help train the brain to operate more efficiently. The brain doesn't grow through willpower alone. It grows through repetition, reward, and structure. With deliberate practice, the circuits involved in task initiation and completion can become more robust. And over time, the gap between what you start and what you finish begins to close, not just through trying harder, but by understanding how your brain works and applying strategies that align with its design. When people think of ADHD, they often associate it exclusively with inattention, distractibility, or impulsivity. But there's another less obvious, often overlooked feature that shows up consistently: hyperfocus. This may seem paradoxical. After all, how can someone who can't focus also focus too intensely? But once we understand the underlying neurobiology, the contradiction disappears. In fact, hyperfocus is one of the clearest signs that ADHD isn't about a lack of attention. It's about a dysregulation of attention. To break this down, we have to first understand what focus actually is. Focus isn't a switch that's either on or off. It's a dynamic state governed by the coordination of multiple brain systems, particularly those involving dopamine, the prefrontal cortex, and the salience network, the set of brain regions that decides what information is most important at any given moment. In people without ADHD, these systems work in a relatively balanced way. They can shift focus when needed, maintain attention across time, and disengage from overly stimulating inputs when appropriate. But in individuals with ADHD, there's a mismatch between the circuits that detect importance, i.e., salience, and the ones that sustain regulation. This means their brains are drawn toward things that feel immediately stimulating, even if those things aren't relevant or beneficial in the long term. Hyperfocus typically occurs when a task or experience triggers a strong dopamine response. This might be video games, creative work, music production, or even intense conversations. In these cases, dopamine is released in greater than usual amounts, which temporarily normalizes the brain's attentional circuitry. This allows the person to lock into an activity with extreme precision and energy. The key word here is temporarily. Once the stimulation diminishes or the novelty wears off, the dopamine levels crash. That crash makes it difficult to shift focus to the next task, especially if that next task is perceived as boring or less immediately rewarding. This is one of the central features of ADHD. Attention is state-dependent. It depends heavily on context, environment, and neurochemical feedback. Let's also be clear, hyperfocus isn't necessarily a superpower. In the right situation, it can produce amazing results, deep creativity, problem solving, and flow. But when unregulated, it can lead to neglect of responsibilities, poor time management, and emotional burnout. Someone might spend 6 hours hyper-focused on redesigning a spreadsheet, only to forget a scheduled appointment or skip meals. This is where the dysfunction lies. It's not that the person lacks ability, it's that they lack the internal mechanisms to control when and how to apply that ability. From a neurological point of view, the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and nucleus accumbens, two key regions in the brain's reward system, are highly active during hyperfocus. They are closely linked to dopamine release and are strongly influenced by perceived reward or novelty. When these systems are activated by something personally interesting, they send strong signals to the prefrontal cortex to maintain attention. But once that interest fades, the signal drops sharply, and the person's capacity to remain engaged collapses with it. The default mode network DMN, the brain system for self-reflection and mind wandering, is also relevant here. In ADHD, the switching between the DMN and task, positive networks, is impaired. So once the brain is locked into a hyperfocus state, it may have difficulty disengaging, even when the person wants or needs to. This can explain why people with ADHD may say things like, "I got so deep into it, I lost track of time." So what can be done to manage this? First, awareness is critical. Recognizing that hyperfocus is part of your attention profile allows you to leverage it when useful and interrupt it when necessary. For example, using timers or external reminders can cue the brain to disengage, which helps reintroduce conscious control into the system. Second, strategic scheduling is key. If you know certain tasks trigger hyperfocus, block out time for them, but also create clear transition rituals for moving on. This could include movement, changes in lighting, breathing exercises, or simply switching environments. Third, regular dopamine regulation throughout the day can prevent the extremes of under- and overstimulation. This includes limiting impulsive digital consumption, getting early morning sunlight, and incorporating non-sleep deep rest protocols like NSDR or meditation. These interventions increase baseline dopamine tone, making it easier to engage in more mundane tasks without needing a hyper-stimulating environment. Finally, the goal isn't to eliminate hyperfocus. The goal is to develop the capacity to guide it, to treat it as a powerful tool that you can wield intentionally rather than being pulled into it at the expense of your life and priorities. Focus, whether too little or too much, is always a reflection of the brain's internal state, and once we understand the mechanisms behind it, we can begin to work with those systems, not against them. Through structure, environment, and targeted practices, attention becomes a skill, trainable, adaptable, and deeply rooted in biology. The ability to focus isn't fixed. It's not something you either have or don't have. Like strength or flexibility, focus is a trainable skill, one that can be improved significantly through targeted behavioral practices and environmental design. And this applies not just to individuals with ADHD, but to anyone living in a modern world filled with attention fragmenting stimuli. Let's first understand how focus works at the level of brain systems. Attention is governed by several interacting neural circuits primarily involving the prefrontal cortex, basal forebrain, thalamus, and visual and auditory processing areas. When we focus, what's happening in the brain is a sort of spotlighting. Specific regions become more active while others are suppressed. This selective activation allows you to hold and manipulate information in your mind while filtering out irrelevant noise. But here's the key: these attentional systems are heavily influenced by dopamine. Dopamine is not just the pleasure molecule. As it's often described, it's more accurately the motivation and drive molecule. It creates a sense of pursuit. When dopamine levels are optimized, we experience clarity, motivation, and the ability to sustain effort over time. When they're dysregulated, too high or too low, focus becomes fragmented, erratic, or even obsessive. Now, in our modern digital environment, we are exposed to constant novelty. social media, short-form videos, email pings, algorithm, curated content. Every time you switch between apps or glance at your phone, you get a little spike of dopamine. These micro rewards train the brain to seek short-term stimulation rather than deep focus. Over time, this rewires the neural circuits to prefer distraction over depth. So, whether you're someone with ADHD or someone who simply finds it hard to concentrate in the current landscape, the solution lies in resetting your brain's relationship with attention, and that begins with behavioral tools that are rooted in neuroscience. One of the most effective strategies is called visual anchoring. This is a simple practice where you fix your gaze on a single point, an object on your desk, a spot on the wall, or even your hand, for 30 to 60 seconds before beginning a task. This stabilizes the ocular system, which is closely linked to the brain's attentional networks. By reducing microsaccades, tiny eye movements, the brain's arousal systems calm, and your focus becomes more internally directed. Another powerful protocol is the 90-minute ultradian cycle approach. Research shows that our brain naturally operates in cycles of heightened alertness that last about 90 minutes. Instead of trying to grind through hours of unfocused effort, it's far more effective to work in intense 90-minute blocks followed by 10-20-minute breaks. During the work block, eliminate all digital distractions, silence notifications, put your phone in another room. Use tools like sight blockers if needed. The key is to maximize signal-to-noise ratio, allowing your brain to enter a deep focus state. Breath work can also be used as an on-ramp to focus. Slow, deliberate inhales followed by long exhales help shift the body from sympathetic, alert mode into a more balanced, parasympathetic state where cognition thrives. A specific breathing protocol, physiological size, has been shown to reduce stress and increase focus almost immediately. This involves taking 2 inhales through the nose, one longer, one shorter, followed by a slow exhale through the mouth. Doing 1-3 of these can rapidly calm the nervous system and improve your ability to focus. You can also train focus through deliberate discomfort. One practice involves setting a timer for a short but defined period, say 5 minutes, and engaging with a cognitively demanding task without allowing yourself to escape it. Even if your mind wanders, the rule is simple: don't leave the task. This trains your attentional muscle, much like lifting weights strengthens physical muscles. Over time, you can increase these durations to build mental endurance. Crucially, we must also consider reward timing. If you only reward yourself after you've completed a long task, your brain might begin to associate effort with discomfort. But if you reward yourself periodically throughout the process, with a quick stretch, a sip of coffee, or even brief movement, you tap into the brain's dopamine system in a way that makes effort itself feel rewarding. This is how you build what's known as dopamine stacking, which allows the brain to start associating focus and productivity with pleasurable outcomes. Finally, it's essential to think about consistency. Just like physical training, focus training only works if it's repeated. A single day of deep work won't rewire your brain, but daily repetition of these practices over weeks and months will begin to create the neural pathways necessary for sustained attention. Focus is not something you wait for, it's something you initiate and build. With the right tools, it becomes possible not only to reclaim your attention, but to sharpen it into a cognitive advantage in an increasingly distracted world. Sleep is not optional if you're aiming to improve focus, mood, memory, or overall mental health. In fact, if there is a single variable that has the power to either enhance or destroy your ability to focus, it's sleep. The quality, consistency, and timing of your sleep directly impact the very brain systems that govern attention, emotional regulation, and executive function. First thing to understand is that sleep is not just rest. It's an active biological process involving critical neural and hormonal shifts that essentially reboot the brain each night. During sleep, especially during deep non-REM sleep and REM sleep, our brain undergoes processes of memory consolidation, synaptic pruning, and neurochemical rebalancing. These stages are essential for forming new neural connections and for clearing out waste products like beta amyloid, which, if left unchecked, impair cognitive function. When sleep is compromised, either in duration or quality, focus is among the first abilities to degrade. That's because the prefrontal cortex, the brain's control center for attention, planning, and decision making, is particularly sensitive to sleep loss. Even a single night of sleep deprivation reduces prefrontal cortex activity and increases noise in the brain's default mode network, which leads to intrusive thoughts and difficulty filtering out distractions. From a neurochemical perspective, lack of sleep creates imbalances in key neurotransmitters. Dopamine, which drives motivation and focus, is reduced. Norepinephrine, which helps regulate alertness, becomes dysregulated. And the stress hormone cortisol often spikes, keeping the body in a heightened state of arousal and making it harder to focus or relax. This is especially problematic for people with ADHD, who already have lower baseline dopamine levels and less efficient prefrontal function. Another crucial system influenced by sleep is the locus coeruleus noradrenaline system, which helps the brain shift between internal and external modes of attention. When sleep deprived, this system becomes sluggish, leading to poor attentional switching, mental fog, and slower reaction times. In practical terms, that might look like rereading the same paragraph 5 times, forgetting why you opened a browser tab, or struggling to stay engaged in conversations. There's also a growing body of research showing that sleep regulates emotional salience, how much weight the brain assigns to incoming information. When well rested, the brain accurately prioritizes what's important and what isn't. But under sleep deprivation, the amygdala becomes hyperactive and emotional reactivity increases. This means that small distractions like a phone notification, a noisy neighbor, or a passing thought are treated as more important than they really are. The result, fragmented focus and reduced productivity. So, what can be done to optimize sleep in a way that directly improves focus? First and foremost, consistency is key. Going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends, anchors your circadian rhythm. The brain loves rhythm. The suprachiasmatic nucleus SCN in the hypothalamus acts like a master clock, coordinating hormones, body temperature, and sleep-wake cycles. When this rhythm is disrupted, everything from cognitive function to metabolic health suffers. One of the most effective ways to entrain this clock is through morning sunlight exposure. Within 30-60 minutes of waking, expose your eyes to natural light for at least 10 minutes. This suppresses melatonin and boosts cortisol in a healthy, time-locked way, setting the stage for better focus during the day and better sleep at night. In the evening, reducing artificial light, especially blue light, is essential. Blue light from screens delays melatonin in release and shifts your sleep phase later, making it harder to fall asleep and reducing sleep quality. Using dim, warm lighting after sunset and limiting screen use 1-2 hours before bed can significantly enhance melatonin in production and sleep architecture. There's also evidence for behavioral wind-down protocols. Engaging in a predictable routine like stretching, reading, or a brief non-sleep deep rest NSDR protocol sends signals to the brain that it's time to disengage from high alertness and enter a rest phase. These routines help shift autonomic tone from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and digest, which is critical for sleep onset. Caffeine and alcohol deserve special mention. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours, and even if you feel tired after an afternoon cup of coffee, it may still be disrupting the depth and continuity of your sleep. Alcohol, while sedative, fragments sleep and suppresses REM, impairing cognitive performance the next day. If you're trying to improve focus, reducing or eliminating both substances, especially later in the day, is one of the highest leverage changes you can make. Finally, sleep debt is cumulative. You can't fully recover from chronic sleep restriction with one long night. The effects on attention and working memory may take several days of consistent sleep to reverse, so the goal should not be to catch up. But to prioritize sleep as a non-negotiable foundation of cognitive performance, the takeaway here is simple. If you're trying to sharpen your focus, start by sharpening your sleep. A well-rested brain is a focused brain. And while supplements, routines, and tools can help, nothing replaces the power of consistent, high-quality sleep for restoring and enhancing your ability to pay attention, solve problems, and stay mentally agile in a distracted world. One of the most misunderstood components of attention and focus is movement. We often think of focus as something that happens when the body is still and the mind is quiet. But in reality, movement is one of the most powerful tools for regulating attention, increasing alertness, and enhancing cognitive flexibility. Let's start by looking at the brain-body relationship. The brain doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a bidirectional system, constantly communicating with the body via the autonomic nervous system, hormonal signals, and proprioceptive feedback. One of the most direct ways to influence your brain state, particularly your capacity to focus, is by moving your body. From a neural standpoint, physical movement activates the reticular activating system RAS, a network of neurons in the brainstem that plays a central role in wakefulness and attention. When you move, especially in rhythmic, intentional ways, signals are sent from your muscles, joints, and vestibular system to the brain, triggering a global increase in arousal and cognitive readiness. This isn't just about staying awake. It's about priming the brain to engage, prioritize, and sustain attention. Another key system here is the dopaminergic network, particularly the projections from the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and substantia nigra to the prefrontal cortex and striatum. These pathways are central to motivation, reward, anticipation, and executive function. Movement, especially aerobic exercise and activities involving coordination or skill, stimulates dopamine release and increases dopamine receptor sensitivity. This has huge implications for anyone with ADHD or focus challenges, because dopamine is the primary driver of sustained attention in the brain. Research consistently shows that moderate intensity exercise, something as simple as a brisk 10-20-minute walk, can improve attention span, working memory, and tasks, switching ability for hours afterward. One study out of the University of Illinois demonstrated that a single session of aerobic exercise significantly improved attention and inhibitory control in children with ADHD, with effect comparable to low-dose stimulant medication. But it's not just about aerobic movement. Fine, motor tasks like balancing exercises, juggling, or even dance activate the cerebellum, which we now know plays a role not just in motor coordination, but in timing, prediction, and focus. The cerebellum helps the brain make adjustments in real time, which translates to better cognitive control and less mental noise. Then there's the role of bilateral movement, such as walking, swimming, or cycling. These activities activate both hemispheres of the brain in a synchronized way, promoting interhemispheric communication through the corpus callosum. This is important because optimal focus requires integration. The left hemisphere's detail orientation must work in concert with the right hemisphere's broader awareness. When both sides are activated and communicating well, the brain becomes more stable and resilient to distraction. Timing is also important. Exercising early in the day, ideally within 30 minutes to 1 hour of waking, provides the greatest benefits for focus throughout the day. This is partly due to the impact on circadian alignment and cortisol release. Cortisol gets a bad reputation, but in the right dose at the right time early in the day, it actually promotes alertness and attention. Movement amplifies that effect. For those with ADHD or fluctuating energy, movement breaks during cognitive work can be a game changer. The brain wasn't designed to sit in one spot and stare at a screen for hours. Introducing 3-5-minute micro-movement breaks, simple dynamic stretches, air squats, a quick set of push-ups, can reset attention, increase blood flow, and recalibrate neurotransmitter levels. These short bursts re-engage the noradrenergic system, sharpening focus without needing caffeine or digital stimulation. Even eye movements, a form of movement, can improve focus. Practices like smooth pursuit eye tracking, following a moving object with your eyes, have been shown to activate attention networks and increase engagement with tasks. This is closely related to what we call visual anchoring, which helps ground your focus in physical space before entering a period of concentrated work. It's important to understand that these effects are not marginal. In fact, movement can sometimes outperform pharmacological interventions when it comes to improving attention, especially when done consistently. Unlike medication, movement-based interventions carry no side effects, cost nothing, and enhance multiple domains of health simultaneously: mood, sleep, metabolism, and brain function. To truly improve focus, it's not enough to just try harder or cut out distractions. You need to work with your biology. And one of the most accessible and reliable ways to do that is through strategic movement. Whether you're using it to transition into work, to break up periods of deep focus, or to reset after mental fatigue, movement serves as a biological lever, a way to signal the brain that it's time to engage. The bottom line is simple: move your body to move your mind. Your ability to focus isn't just in your head. It's in your legs, your spine, your eyes, your lungs. The nervous system is unified. When you move, you activate the very systems that allow your brain to direct energy, attention, and effort toward what matters most.